Go ahead and remove your hubcap. If you have steel wheels, if you have aluminum wheels, well, you don't have to worry about this. Try to be gentle with this. Sometimes they are stuck and they do break easily because they're plastic. I'm using a little pry bar. You can use a small screwdriver if that's what you have. There you go. And now with a 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts. The wheel is stuck on here, so I'm going to leave 1 lug nut on and then use a rubber mallet. Hit it from the backside, but don't hit the rim, hit the tire. There we go. Now you can take this lug nut off. And remove your wheel. Next, the drum has to come off of here. Sometimes it'll be frozen onto the hub. Mine is actually moving, so that's a good sign. If it is frozen, you can either use 2 8x125 bolts in here, thread them in, and that'll push it out of the hub. You can hammer it, you can do whatever it takes to get it off. I know mine is free, it's just a matter of wiggling it and getting it to come off of the shoes. There we go. Perfect. To get rid of all this dust, I'm going to start by using some brake parts cleaner and just rinsing down everything here. That way I don't have to breathe in any of the dust that's stuck on the brakes. From the back side, go ahead and unplug this ABS connector. You can take some needle nose pliers, squeeze the 2 sides, wiggle it, and pull it off. Perfect. The bolts that hold on the wheel bearing, you can access through this hole here, or either of these 2, but there are 4, 1 on each corner. You're going to have to use a 3/8 socket that is small enough to fit in here, so you can't use 1/2 inch. Take all of these out, they're 14mm. But this wheel bearing is pretty stuck on here for me. At this point, it's free to come off, it's just seized onto the backing plate there. I'm just going to try and twist it, pry it, and do whatever it takes to get this thing off of here. So my wheel bearing is really stuck on there. So what I'm going to do is take the brakes off. That way I have better access behind them so I can hopefully break this free. I'm going to start by removing this large spring up here. I use locking pliers so I can firmly lock it onto the spring. Use the hub to pry this off. Next, you have these little spring retainers. If you hold the pin from the backside, you can push them in and then twist them. You have to turn them 90 degrees. So hold the pin from the backside. I'm going to use some needle nose pliers, turn them 90 degrees, and you basically want to match up. There's a little slot in there that has to go through the hole on this cap. You just want to match that up and make it fall through. Perfect. Remove the springs. There's another piece here. This piece that you see here was actually supposed to stay with the spring, but I guess it's a little rusty. Take that off. Now you can pull the shoe off and the pin can come out through the back side. And you want to do the same thing on this side. Fortunately, this side is not as rusty. For this side, I'm going to use my locking pliers, clamp it onto the little cap of this spring, press them in, twist it 90 degrees, and remove the spring, as well as the pin. Hold the brake shoe so it doesn't fall, and remove the whole assembly. You can disconnect the 2 shoes here on the bottom with this little spring, and now you can tilt this one out of your way. I was hoping to push this backing plate off, vibrate the wheel bearing off, but it didn't work. So I'm gonna have to take this whole assembly off. I'm gonna remove these bolts, I'm gonna remove the brake line, the parking brake cable, and put this in the vise and push the hub and bearing out from the back. So I'm gonna use some locking pliers, lock it onto this fitting. I already tried the other fitting and it's rounding off. This brake line needs to be replaced anyway because it's rotting out. So whatever I have to do to take this off, but basically I need to remove it or disconnect it from the rest of the vehicle so I can bring my knuckle over to the vise. All right, that one broke free, and as you can see, it's spinning the whole line, which, like I said, I have to replace anyway. Hopefully for you that is not the case. I'm just going to work it back and forth here, break it free. In order to prevent any leakage, I'm going to very gently pinch off this hose. If you don't have these sort of pliers, which by the way don't close all the way because otherwise they'll collapse the hose internally, and be very gentle, don't squeeze it too tight. What you can do is push the brake pedal down, put a long pry bar or breaker bar between the seat and the brake pedal, and squish the brake pedal down to the floor and leave it there. That's actually going to stop all brake fluid from coming out of the lines. At this point, I can continue removing this line. Yes, it's going to break, but I just need to get it off of here so we can continue with our repair. Next, disconnect the parking brake cable from the brake shoe. You can just gently pry on the spring backwards and then pull this up. There you go. Now you need a 10mm socket to remove these two bolts here. Be very gentle, a lot of times they snap. There you go. If you're using an impact, which I recommend for this kind of stuff, just don't go full blast with it because they'll break. Remove your bolts. I have these started just so I can remove this parking brake cable. This thing should pop right off of here. There we go. That popped right off. Now I'm going to take my two top bolts out, which we're securing this whole assembly in, and off comes your backing plate with the hub and bearing. With a pick, I went around and just tried to pick out some rust chunks that were here. Hopefully that'll get the penetrating fluid deeper in there. And I'm also going to use some heat. I don't want to get this backing plate red hot because then it'll definitely bend, but I do want to get a little bit of heat in it. Hopefully that'll expand this area here and help break it free. So I'm going to upgrade to a bigger torch just because the small one wasn't really doing much. So what I'm going to do now is just gently heat around the perimeter of where the wheel bearing goes in. And because I'm using this torch, this has a much more precise flame. I'm hoping to just expand this area here and hopefully break free the rust that is holding in this wheel bearing. Okay, I've been heating this for about 2 minutes now. I'm going to give it a try with a regular hammer this time, not a pneumatic hammer. Hopefully the pressure from the regular hammer will be greater and we'll break this free. Victory! With the bearing out, I want to prepare the knuckle for the installation of the new bearing. So I'm going to take a wire brush. Of course, if yours is not as rusty, you don't have to clean it as thoroughly, but still give it a nice, look over and make sure that there's no debris stuck in there. I have a lot of flaky rust and sand that's stuck in there, and I want to get that all out so that the new wheel bearing can seat properly. And get it out of this little crevice here. And scrub the outside of this too, so that when it seats, it can seat flush and not crooked from having rust build up on there. Now, if yours is even worse, you might need a sanding disc of some sort to grind it flat. This one is rusty, but not horrible. While I'm here with my wire brush, I'm gonna quickly brush off the corrosion off of this parking brake cable so that it can seat in properly. Came out a little difficult, so I just want to make sure it goes in the right way. With my brake parts cleaner, I'm going to wash off all the dust and oils that have accumulated on here. Wipe it off. And I'm going to do the same type of cleanup to the backing plate. I want to clean right around this lip here where the wheel bearing goes in, just to make sure that there's nothing preventing it from actually fully seating. And if you have any rust here build up, go ahead and scrape that off as well. I'm going to put some anti-seize on the hub here. That way it'll hopefully prevent this from happening in the future if this wheel bearing ever does have to be replaced again. Make sure you get in on this inner ring here because that's where the bearing actually sits and that's where it seizes up most of the time. I'm I'm also going to put some on this parking brake cable, just a little bit. Take your new wheel bearing, make sure the ABS sensor is facing towards the front of the car. It can only pretty much go one way because it has to fit through that slot. Stick it through the backing plate, and then try to line it up with the hub here, with the knuckle. Now get your bolts. Now as you line up your holes, you can start in some of your bolts, whichever ones line up first. All right, that one started. This will hold it for me as I try to start the other ones. Before I tighten any of them down, I want to start in all four to make sure that they're all lined up, and it's important to start them by hand so you don't cross thread them by accident. Now I'm going to gently bottom them out. I don't want to make them too tight because I want to torque them. And I'm going to go from one side to the other so that this whole assembly can seat properly. Go ahead and torque all these to 59 foot-pounds. I'm going to go in a cross pattern again to make sure that it's fully seated. I'm going to put the parking brake cable back through its hole and then attach it with my two 10mm bolts. Go ahead and snug these up. Ooh. Make sure they're nice and tight. You don't want this coming off on you. To attach the parking brake cable to the parking brake lever on the shoe, I'm going to use some pliers, pull the spring back, and then slide the cable down into the groove here of this hook. All right, once it's hooked on, release your locking pliers. Take the shoe, slide it up and over. Make sure it's hooked onto the top in the brake cylinder, as well as on the bottom right here in this retainer. Then you can take your pin, find the hole through the backing plate, and slide it all the way through. And hold it right there. And then you take your spring with two caps, one on each end, line up the slot for the caps, press it on, and if you twist it 90 degrees, it should lock on, and then the pin will hold your brake shoe in place. Now you can take your other side shoe, put the bottom spring on, hook it onto the other shoe as well on the bottom, and I like to pry the spring with the leverage of the shoe. So line up the bottom here, hold the top of this shoe, bring this top in place, and now if you just gently hold them there, it'll stay. Now bring your pin through the hole in the backing plate, add your spring to it, line up the two slots, and press it on, give it a 90-degree twist. There we go. Sometimes this is easier with some pliers. Now make sure the shoes are slid into place. Spin your adjuster so that the cutout in the adjuster will match up with this cutout here. And then take your spring, and I like to use some needle nose locking pliers. That way I know I have a good grip on it. This is under quite a bit of tension. Lock them on tight and pull the shoes. This is going to be the trickiest part of it all because you have to line up the adjuster and the spring at the same time and make sure that the shoes don't pop out. The adjuster's in. All right, once it's in the hole, there you go. Press it on, make sure it goes in. And now ensure that they're both locked together, seated properly. Perfect. Put on some anti-seize. Try not to get it too much on the brakes. When you put your drum on, you want to make sure that you line up this hole in the drum with the large hole on the hub. That's going to allow you to adjust the brake shoes through the drum. You don't have to take it off, you just take the wheel off. There you go, match that up. So for drum brakes, you want a little bit of drag. you want to hear them touch, and when you spin it, you don't want more than 1.5 rotations out of this, so it can't just keep spinning freely. In my case, I need to tighten up the e-brake shoes because they're way too loose right now. So I'm gonna spin the adjuster wheel up top here, adjust them out a little, and just go little by little because even 1 or 2 turns will make it way too tight or way too loose. So right now I can already feel I made it a little bit too tight, so I have to back it off. Okay, so that's pretty much exactly where I want it. If you follow the text, it spins about 1.5 times and it stops, so that is perfect. And if you have a rubber boot to go in there, go ahead and insert that. That's going to prevent water from making its way into your brakes. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and connect the ABS sensor back into the wheel hub, make sure it clicks. And now I'm going to put my brake line back in place. I went ahead and made a new line. And I'm going to start it into the wheel cylinder first. Thread that on. Perfect. Once that's started, go ahead and start it into the brake line here by the strut. And now snug both fittings up. That's snug. I'm going to use the flare nut wrench at the end to make sure it's as tight as I can get it. But I'm going to do it with the open-ended wrench for now because it goes faster. Snug it up with your flare nut wrench. That way you have less of a chance of stripping the fitting. That's nice and tight. Now with an 8mm, open your bleeder screw and let gravity pull the brake fluid down through the brake line and out the bleeder. That's going to take out any air that's in there. It's very important to do this since you've disconnected your brake line. And in order to allow it to bleed, remove any restriction that you might have, whether it's the little pliers here or your brake pedal depressor tool. Go ahead and close up your bleeder screw once you have a steady trickle of fluid. You can perform a manual brake bleed as well, which consists of first checking your master cylinder and making sure that's full, and then you have someone pump up the brake pedal and then hold pressure on it, crack the bleeder with pressure being held on the brake pedal, let the brake fluid and potentially air come out, close it up, pump up the brake pedal again, and repeat the process until you have no more air coming out of here. At that point, if you have a rubber cap that goes over this bleeder, go ahead and put it back on. I don't have one, so I'm just gonna have to leave it this way and get one later. Go ahead and put on your wheel. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Double check them. Now don't forget about your hubcap if you're dealing with steel rims with a hubcap. If you do have one, make sure you match this cutout with the valve stem, otherwise your valve stem is going to get crushed. And press this right on. And then you're done.